Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to uncover a really warm, timeless truth about longevity. We're looking at the hard science of how human connection, spiritual grounding, and even the literal thoughts bouncing around in our heads biologically dictate how long we live. We usually think of aging as the strictly mechanical process, right? Well, today, we're going to see how love actually extends our lifespan. And on the flip side, how negative, hateful thoughts can biologically accelerate an early death.
So what really predicts a long, happy life? Let's jump right in and challenge a super pervasive myth. I mean, we almost always assume extreme longevity is purely about physical metrics. We think it's all about nailing the perfect diet, logging a crazy amount of miles on the treadmill, or just plain winning the genetic lottery. But what does the data actually tell us?
Well, there's this incredible, nearly 80-year longitudinal study from Harvard that actually tracked a group of men all the way from the Great Depression well into their later years. And the researchers found something absolutely astounding. When they gathered all the data on these men at age 50, it wasn't their middle-age cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. Crazy, right? No, it turns out the people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. So the real takeaway here is that tending to your relationships is literally a form of physical self-care.
Section 1. Love, Family, and Community. Let's explore how lifelong love and deep social integration act as a literal biological shield for our bodies. Think about this number for a second. Research shows that people with strong, consistent social connections have a staggering 50% greater chance of longevity than those who are isolated. 50%. I mean, that's not just a marginal bump in health, it's a massive survival advantage. Being part of a community fundamentally alters your mortality risk.
We see this perfectly mapped out in the world's blue zones. You know, those regions where people consistently live to be over 100. In places like Okinawa and Sardinia, connection is literally baked into daily life. They prioritize regular gatherings and shared meals. They stay connected across generations, often living under one roof so the elderly are fully integrated with the youth. They foster a collective sense of purpose, which in Japan is known as ikigai. And they build lifelong support circles, called moai, where friends stick together from childhood right into their twilight years. It basically completely eradicates the risk of chronic isolation.
Section 2. The Power of Spirituality. Moving into this next area, we see that nurturing a spiritual life, or participating in religious communities, is another ancient anchor for extending our years. And the numbers here are just incredible. A massive Harvard study that tracked over 74,000 women found that those who attended religious services more than once a week had a 33% lower risk of all-cause mortality compared to those who never attended. They also had significantly lower rates of cardiovascular and cancer mortality. But you might be wondering, how exactly does sitting in a pew or meditating on a higher power physically stop a heart attack?
Well, here's the why. Clinical reviews highlight 6 distinct biological and psychological mechanisms linking spirituality to longevity. And it's not magic, right? It's deeply practical. Spirituality creates a web of social support. It boosts psychological well-being by giving a real sense of life purpose. It encourages positive coping strategies and healthier behaviors. And fundamentally, it provides massive stress reduction.
What's truly fascinating here is the downstream biological effect. Just think about how these psychosocial benefits cascade through the body. Faith-based resilience and the healthy norms promoted by spiritual communities actually directly improve our immune, endocrine, and cardiovascular function. When you relinquish the stresses of everyday life to a higher power, your nervous system literally stops pumping out toxic stress hormones, which paves the way to healthy aging and longevity.
Section 3. How negativity shortens life.
Now, just as love and spirituality heal, we really need to look closely at the darker side of the equation. We need to understand how hateful, stressful, or isolated thoughts actually accelerate an early death. Dr. Robert Waldinger, who directed that 80-year Harvard study we talked about, makes it brutally clear. He says, loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. The physical pain and the emotional toll associated with a lack of connection or harboring bitter, resentful thoughts is just completely toxic to your biology. People who are isolated or consumed by negativity actually experience faster mental decline and die earlier.
To see exactly how deeply our thoughts penetrate our biology, let's look at this shocking study on caregivers of sick patients. Researchers looked at the caregiver's telomeres. Those are the protective caps at the end of our DNA that basically dictate cellular aging.
The caregivers who harbored resentful thoughts, the ones viewing their work as a hateful burden, suffered rapid cellular aging. Their telomeres physically shortened. But get this, the ones who embraced their role with compassion suffered absolutely no telomere shortening at all. The biological reality of your life is heavily dictated by your internal attitude.
On a molecular level, when we hold on to hateful thoughts or suffer from chronic loneliness, it activates a very specific pro-inflammatory transcription factor called NF-κB. Basically, your body interprets social isolation and angry thoughts as a literal physical threat. It turns on a biological defensive program that just floods your system with inflammation. And over time, this chronic inflammation burns the body out from the inside, which drives the diseases of aging like Alzheimer's and heart disease.
Section 4. Healing mind and body. So, if heat and loneliness are biological poisons, how do we find the antidote? Well, the great news is that we have the power to biologically reverse these trends simply by changing our mindsets and embracing mindful practices. Dr. Mark Hyman, while reflecting on conversations with the Dalai Lama, noted something super profound about Tibetan monks who had survived years of imprisonment and torture. They emerged without PTSD. They were intact, peaceful, and happy. How is that possible? As he points out, perhaps stress is more about the stories we tell ourselves about our lives. Our biological reaction to trauma is heavily dictated by the internal narrative we construct. If we choose compassion and wisdom over hate and resentment, our bodies absolutely respond in kind.
And we have the clinical data to back this up right here. In a randomized controlled trial featured in the journal Brain, Behavior, and Immunity, older adults went through an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. By simply teaching people how to meditate and change their relationship to their own thoughts, the program successfully reduced feelings of loneliness. But even more importantly, it actually downregulated that dangerous pro-inflammatory NF-kappa gene expression in their circulating white blood cells. That is a real game changer.
So the biological healing pathways are clear, and they're entirely within your control. First, by actively practicing gratitude and connection, you trigger your vagus nerve to calm your nervous system. Second, by approaching the world with compassion rather than resentment, you literally preserve your DNA's protective telomeres. And third, you can halt chronic, disease-causing inflammation just by practicing mindfulness meditation.
The sheer impact of your mindset really cannot be overstated. A landmark study headed by Becca Levy found that simply holding a positive self-perception of aging, meaning actively challenging those negative, stereotypical thoughts about growing older, grants you an average of 7.5 extra years of life. I mean, that is a more powerful predictor of longevity than your gender, your socioeconomic status, or even whether you exercise.
Which leaves us with the most important question of all today. How will you rewrite the story of your own aging, connection, and purpose? Since we now know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your relationships, your faith, and your mindset directly dictate your cellular health, what steps will you take today to cultivate love, reach out to your community, and let go of those negative thoughts? The power to live a long, healthy, and deeply connected life is quite literally all in your head and in your heart. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.